I've written a few more unit tests at this point. The first test is to make sure that the edit action of the reviews controller gives the DB context the edited review when it's invoked. This test works by instantiating a new review object and passing it into the controller action. Remember, the edit action in the reviews controller, it uses the attach method to tell a context about an edited object. Now, the trick to this test working is that we just need to make sure that the fake database now has the object inside its reviews collection. So that's the assert we are writing. And this is one of those places where a test double or a fake doesn't really behave like the real thing. With a real DB context, we'd have to check primary key values to make sure a review exists in the database. With this fake in-memory context, we can just compare object references, which is what the contains method inside that assert statement will do. And this difference in behavior is okay. The fake context tries to make this scenario easy to test by just adding an object passed into its attach method to the appropriate collection. And that's one of the jobs of test doubles, or fakes, to make it as easy as possible to write a test. Another example is that we want to make sure that the edit action calls the save changes method. Without calling this method, an object would never get updated in the database. So in the fake DB context, when someone calls save changes, it will set a public property that can be read inside of a test. And that's the property that the test method checks. So both these were easy tests to write against the controller because the framework gives us inherently testable controllers. We have deviated from a true TDD style though because we wrote all of the controller functionality in earlier modules before we wrote the test, but I think you can see it's possible to come back later and write the test too. However, you can often improve a design if you are using tests and writing them right from the very start. Now, one thing you'll notice that is different from the last clip is that there is less setup code in the tests, particularly inside of the index action model as 3 reviews test. And that's because I'm now using a setup method in NUnit. A setup method is a method that's decorated with a setup attribute, and NUnit will automatically call this method before it executes each test. So inside of here, I can set up the fake DB context and populate it with some reviews, and now it's available throughout all of the tests inside of this class. Quite often you'll run into some scenarios where you need different types of setup data for different tests. In fact, you'll run into this with controllers quite often because controllers are typically responsible for a number of different scenarios. Like this reviews controller that I'm testing, it's responsible for listing reviews and editing reviews and creating reviews. One thing I'd think about doing in this situation is having a different test fixture per each scenario. So instead of having a test fixture that's dedicated to testing the entire reviews controller, I would have a test fixture dedicated to testing the index action of the reviews controller and the edit action of the reviews controller. You'll find many people still generally want to stick with one test fixture per application class, but there's also a lot of people, myself included, that now find it easier to write tests if we construct the test fixtures around specific use cases. Then all the tests inside the fixture have a single focus. Another thing to notice about these tests is that they each test a very specific outcome. Generally speaking, you want to have one assert per test, and that doesn't literally mean that you have only one assert.isTrue or assert.requal in a test, but you do want all the asserts to work towards a common goal. That's why I don't make assertions about save changes inside the same test that makes sure the action has attached an entity to the DB context. At this point, we could continue writing some tests, but let's turn our attention back to the reviews controller and the way it handles the IDB context.